Welcome to the History in Focus channel. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss more videos like this one.
In the first part of this video, you learned about hangings, lynchings, and bodies strung up as warnings. And you thought that was the worst of the Wild West? History hid dirtier things. Human skin turned into shoes for an elected governor. A blanket delivered as a diplomatic gift infected with smallpox on the inside. Entire families hunting each other for 30 years without truce. 11 real punishments that textbooks prefer to ignore. Welcome to part 2. Punishment number 1, tar and feathers. The victim was stripped by force in the middle of the street, in front of the entire town. Then boiling pine tar was poured directly onto the bare skin from the back down to the legs. On top, they threw a sack of chicken feathers. The skin burned, the smell was unbearable, and the humiliation never came off. Some punishments on the frontier were not invented to kill a man. They were invented to destroy his name for the rest of his life. Pine tar had to be heated until it became a thick liquid. The temperature sat between 140 and 160 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to burn the skin in seconds. And the worst part was not even the initial burn. It was what came after. The material stuck to the body in such a way that pulling it off meant even greater pain. Some victims carried the scars for the rest of their lives. Others developed severe infections in the following days and died of fever. Covered in feathers, the victim was not finished yet. The attackers placed them in a wooden cart, or sometimes tied the person on top of a fence rail, and paraded them through town. Men, women, and children came out of their houses to watch. Some laughed out loud, others spat. The goal was to turn the person into a grotesque circus. When the shame reached the point where the person could no longer look anyone in the eye, the punishment finally took effect. In Texas and Oklahoma, between 1865 and 1885, post-war vigilante groups adopted the method as their preferred punishment. Card cheats, fake preachers, dishonest traveling salesmen, Republicans in the defeated South, anyone could be next in line. There was no need to commit an actual crime. It was enough to be unpopular, to be different, or to be on the wrong side at the wrong time. The practice did not originate on the frontier. In January of 1774 in Boston, a British customs inspector named John Malcolm was dragged from his home by the Sons of Liberty, stripped in the street, and covered in boiling tar. It was a colonial form of political protest against the crown. Decades later, when pioneers pushed westward, they inherited the custom. Only the West took the politics out of the equation. What once punished loyalists became punishment for anyone. In many cases, the tar was only the first act. After the parade through town, the person received a short ultimatum: leave by dawn or show up dead on the corner. Those who stayed faced beatings, a bullet in the back, or the rope. It was a method that fit 3 punishments into one: torture, humiliation, and forced expulsion. The vigilantes discovered that destroying a person entirely was less work than killing them and then having to explain the body the next day. There was no court to reverse the sentence. There was no lawyer to appeal. Once covered in tar and feathers, the social mark stuck to the person even after the body healed. The victim carried this stigma wherever they went, rejected by the town that applied the punishment and by any other that learned the story. Some changed their names, others were never seen again. Punishment number 2, ear mutilation. Cutting the ear of a convicted person was not improvised barbarism by a drunk in a saloon. It was a punishment provided by law, inherited from medieval England, and applied by courts and vigilantes across the entire American frontier. In territories where no jail existed, the criminal's own face became the sentence. He did not need to carry an identity card or a police report. All he had to do was turn sideways, and anyone knew who he was. The Pennsylvania law of 1780 was direct on the subject. Horse thieves received a branding iron on the first conviction. Repeat offenders lost their ears without ceremony. The code treated the human body as a public registry. Each mutilation was a permanent record that anyone could read from a distance. Without ears, there was no way to hide in a new town or change your name. The face silently told what the convicted man would never say of his own free will. The logic was cruel in its simplicity. Jail was expensive and the frontier had none. Branding marks faded over time, turning into rough and unreadable skin. But a cut ear did not grow back. It was the perfect punishment for territory without a judge, without a prosecutor, without a protocol book. It cost nothing, lasted a lifetime, and could be identified from across the street. In the mining camps of California during the gold rush of 1849, thieves caught in the act lost one or both ears before being expelled from the diggings. The procedure was done with a dirty hunting knife, without alcohol, without a needle, without thread. What came next was the sole responsibility of the mutilated man. Those who survived carried the mark. Those who died of infection in the following days became one less problem for the camp and one more grave on the hill. Texas and New Mexico concentrated the majority of ear mutilation records between 1860 and 1880. Informal tribunals formed by 3 or 4 ranchers sentenced thieves to lose an ear and have a few hours to disappear from the territory. There were no minutes. There was no lawyer. There was no chance of appeal. The sentence was carried out the same day in front of the sheriff's office shack or the nearest corral. The man left before the sun went down. The mutilation created a permanent caste of outcasts. Without ears, it became impossible to find a job, find shelter, or earn trust in any new town. The mark turned former convicts into perpetual targets, identified in a single glance by any community that chose to watch them. Many became outlaws out of necessity, not out of calling. The punishment that was supposed to scare potential criminals ended up producing exactly what it promised to prevent. With the arrival of formal courts on the frontier, ear mutilation was gradually abandoned. But for decades, men and women continued traveling the roads of the West with that mark on their face. Each scar told a story of summary judgment, of a blade pressed against the head, of a society that chose to engrave its verdicts on anyone who dared to transgress. Punishment number 3, riding the rail. The victim was forced to straddle a triangular fence rail with the sharp edge pressing directly against the groin. Then the person was hoisted onto the shoulders of 2 or 3 men and paraded through town. Each step of the carriers multiplied the pain. Gravity did the rest of the work. There was no need to hit. There was no need to cut. The weight of the condemned person's own body became the instrument of torture. The wooden horse was the stationary version of the same torture. A wooden beam with a sharp edge mounted on top of tall sawhorses. The condemned was placed on top, with weights tied to the ankles to intensify the pressure. Hours in that position caused severe injuries, intense bleeding, and permanent damage. Some never walked properly again. The punishment left marks nobody saw from the outside, but that the victim felt with every step from that point forward. At Camp Douglas in Utah, the punishment was applied by Union volunteers during the Civil War. The crime? Drunkenness. Soldiers who drank too much were sat on the triangular rail in front of the entire camp. The message was clear: whoever loses control loses something more. The method was considered legitimate military discipline, not torture. The difference depended exclusively on which side of the rail you were sitting on that hot afternoon. At Fort Bridger in Wyoming, Captain Anson Mills elevated the cruelty to another level. He ordered the construction of a wooden horse, nearly 6.5 feet tall, equipped with a sharpened blade on top. The most severe versions exceeded 8 feet. The condemned was hoisted and dropped onto the blade. The greater the height, the greater the impact, the greater the weight, the deeper the cut. In the frontier towns, the rail ride was reserved for offenses the community considered shameful: adultery, business betrayal, cowardice in a duel, informing on companions. These were not violent crimes. They were social transgressions that no formal code addressed. The rail was the community's improvised response for anyone who violated invisible codes. The written law handled crimes on paper. The rail handled what nobody dared put on paper. The entire process could last hours. The victim was forced to travel the entire town, with stops at every corner so more people could watch. When they were finally removed from the rail, they could barely stand. Some needed weeks to recover, others never fully recovered. The wood did not cut like a knife. It crushed slowly, and the pain settled in and stayed as a permanent tenet of the body, without an eviction notice. The wooden horse and the rail ride disappeared with the arrival of formal courts. But for decades, they were considered acceptable punishment, even moderate, by local standards. In a territory where the alternative was the rope around the neck, losing your dignity on top of a beam seemed like mercy. The Wild West had a particular concept of clemency. Almost always, it came with blood, broken bones, and prolonged silence afterward. Punishment number 4, public whipping. When the back of the condemned became the parchment where the law wrote the sentence of the day. A leather whip, an oak rod, or the cat o' nine tails, 9 braided leather strands with metal knots at the tips. The sound of the lash cutting the air came first, then the scream, then the silence of the crowd. The frontier measured justice in lashes and counted them out loud. Frontier towns kept flogging posts in public places, central squares, busy intersections, in front of the sheriff's office. They were permanent structures made of hardwood, with cast iron rings where the condemned person's hands were tied above the head. The presence of those posts functioned as a tool of punishment and constant warning at the same time. The cat o' nine tails was the most feared instrument of all. 9 strands of braided rawhide, each with hard knots or pieces of lead sewn into the tips. A single blow produced 9 simultaneous wounds. 10 blows meant 90 cuts across the back. 20 blows could leave the skin unrecognizable. Many of the condemned passed out before the 4th or 5th strike. The number of lashes was decided by the severity of the crime, or by the mood of whoever ordered the punishment at the moment. 10 blows for minor offenses, 20 to 30 for theft, 50 or more for serious crimes. There was no official limit. Records from military forts describe sentences of 100 lashes. A number few bodies could withstand without going into hypovolemic shock. The mathematics of suffering had no ceiling written in any manual. After the flogging, coarse salt or vinegar was rubbed into the open wounds, officially to prevent infection. In practice, to multiply the pain precisely at the moment the condemned thought the worst was already over. The scream that followed was the true conclusion of the spectacle. The audience dispersed satisfied. The man was untied and dropped on the ground. Medical care depended on luck and the charity of some passing stranger. Freed slaves and minorities received disproportionate sentences. For crimes that earned a fine for a white man, a black man, a Mexican, or an indigenous person received dozens of lashes at the same post. The flogging post was not blind. It saw color, origin, and social position with perfect clarity. The punishment that presented itself as egalitarian in its brutality was profoundly selective in its application. The law promised one thing, the whip delivered another. Public flogging was gradually banned as the judicial system advanced westward, but the posts remained standing for years after the last official sentences. The marks on bodies disappeared when the bearers died. The marks on the collective memory of the frontier, those crossed entire generations without fading. Punishment number 5, firing squad. 5 rifles, 1 tied-up target, and no second chance. In pioneer caravans and territories without a court, serious crimes were resolved with lead. The condemned was tied to a post or seated in a wooden chair. A group of shooters lined up the rifles in front, a count out loud, a simultaneous volley. Utah officially adopted the firing squad as a method of execution as early as 1851. The territory, and later the state, maintained the practice for more than a century and a half. The justification was religious. The Mormon doctrine of blood atonement required that certain sins be paid for with literal shedding of blood. The firing squad allowed that. Hanging did not. In Utah, even the way you died was determined by the official theology of the state. The most famous case is that of John D. Lee, executed by firing squad on March 23, 1877, for the Mountain Meadows Massacre. 20 years earlier, Lee had led the attack that killed approximately 120 immigrants in a caravan in Utah, men, women, and children over 8 years old. Only the babies were spared. Lee was the only person convicted for the collective crime. They sat the man on top of his own wooden coffin and fired. The firing squad ritual followed precise rules. 5 or 6 shooters were selected. One of the rifles was loaded with a blank round so that no shooter would know with absolute certainty whether he had fired the fatal bullet. The so-called mercy round was comforting fiction. In practice, the shooters knew. The recoil of a real rifle is unmistakable to someone who knows how to shoot. But the lie allowed all of them to sleep better that night. Not every firing squad executed with precision. Accounts describe condemned men who survived the first volley, hit in the shoulder, abdomen, or limbs, but not in the heart. In those cases, an officer slowly approached and fired the final shot at point-blank range. The minutes between the first volley and the mercy shot were the longest on the American frontier. For the condemned, an eternity. For those watching, a lasting reminder. In the caravans, the firing squad was improvised. There was no formal ritual, no designated rifles, no blank round to hide the guilt. The convoy leader pointed to 3 or 4 men. The accused was placed on his knees in the middle of the circle, and the shots resolved the problem before nightfall. Desertion, murder within the group, theft of essential supplies. On the trail west, crimes against the community were paid with gunpowder and lead. The firing squad survived the frontier era. Utah only abolished the option in 2004 and restored it in 2015 as an alternative method of execution. The last American executed by firing squad was Ronnie Lee Gardner on June 17, 2010 in Salt Lake City. What was born as improvised frontier justice became a legal procedure that crossed 3 centuries. Some Wild West traditions refuse to die, even when their function is precisely that. Punishment number 6, running the gauntlet. Where survival depended on the speed of your feet and your body's ability to take a beating. 2 parallel rows of armed warriors formed a narrow corridor. The prisoner was placed at one end. At the signal, he had to run to the other side while being struck from both sides at the same time. If he reached the end alive, he could live. If he fell in the middle, he died right there. The instruments varied. Wooden clubs, fist-sized rocks, short knives, heavy war clubs, rawhide whips. Each warrior chose the weapon he felt most comfortable with. The corridor could be 65, 100, or 160 feet long. Each step was a new ambush. Each second, a blow from some angle. The smartest ran crouched, protecting the head with the arms. The slowest fell in the first few yards. The practice was documented among the tribes of the Great Plains and among the Iroquois. It was not random punishment of a captured enemy. It was an admission test. The warrior who survived the gauntlet demonstrated enough courage, endurance, and determination for the community to consider him worthy. In many cases, whoever reached the end was adopted by the tribe and received a new name and status. The run was an entrance or a definitive exit. Everything depended on the next few minutes. Captured settlers also faced the gauntlet. Daniel Boone, in 1778, after being captured by the Shawnee, ran a version of the test and survived, being adopted by the tribe under the name Sheltowee. Mary Jemison, captured at 15 years old in 1755, also went through the ceremony. Other prisoners were not as fortunate. The gauntlet made no distinction between bravery and desperation. It measured only who was still standing when the last row was left behind. The gauntlet was not exclusively indigenous. European and American military forces also used variations of the method. Punished soldiers were forced to pass between rows of comrades who struck them with leather belts or wooden rods. The logic was identical: physical punishment with witnesses, where the entire community participated in the collective sentence. The American frontier merely inherited a custom that had already crossed oceans and cultures for centuries. For those who fell, the fate was immediate. The prisoner who could not complete the run was executed on the spot, usually with final blows from the same warriors who had formed the corridor. There was no second attempt. There was no appeal. The body remained where it fell, as a reminder for the next person to face the two rows. The run offered one chance, and only one, and the ground kept the memory of each one who failed. The gauntlet disappeared along with the decline of frontier wars, but its principle remained rooted in the military and prison culture of the country for entire generations. The idea that surviving the punishment was proof of worthiness, that extreme pain could serve as a gateway to personal redemption, echoed in institutions that would never acknowledge the indigenous origin of the custom. Punishment number 7, dragging, beheading, and mutilating, when death needed to be as violent as the message it carried. In the Wild West, bandits and guerrillas tied their victims to horses and dragged them across rocky terrain over enormous distances. There was no mercy in the chosen method. There was no limit to the cruelty applied. The frontier turned the human body into a public warning, and the rough terrain into an active instrument of execution. Dragging someone behind a horse was deliberately prolonged. The victim was tied by the ankles with thick rope and dragged for miles over uneven ground. Sharp rocks, cacti, fallen logs, dry ravines. The body suffered devastating damage with every yard covered. When the horse finally stopped, little remained that would allow identification of the dead. The method did not seek merely death. It sought complete destruction as a brutal declaration of power. Beheading was used as both execution and message. Heads of enemies were stuck on stakes at the entrance of disputed territories, on ranch gates, or at road crossings. Joaquin Murrieta, legendary bandit of California, had his head preserved in a glass jar with alcohol after being killed by the Rangers of Captain Harry Love in July of 1853. The head was publicly displayed for years across the state, at $5 a viewing. Body parts served as proof of death for bounty collection, when transporting the entire corpse was impractical. Valuables were removed before the body cooled. Post-mortem mutilation had clear economic logic on the frontier. Every remnant of a dead man could be worth money at a sheriff's office, and nobody protested on behalf of the rights of a corpse. Death became the beginning of a commercial transaction, not the end of the problem. In conflicts between rival settlers, dragging was used as deliberate terrorism. Remains of victims were left in places where entire families and communities would find them. Bodies appeared at visible points, so the message would be understood without the need for words. The frontier used violence as a complete language. Military records document American soldiers and militiamen practicing mutilations that today would be classified as war crimes. Parts of enemy bodies were collected, displayed as trophies, and even sent as souvenirs to family members back east. The distance between the polished civilization of the Washington salons and the open barbarism of the frontier fields was measured in thousands of miles geographically, and in entire centuries of public morality. The brutality of dragging and mutilation revealed an uncomfortable truth of the frontier. Violence had no defined bottom. Every punishment could be surpassed by another even crueler. Every limit could be crossed by someone with more rage, more power, or more indifference toward human life. The Wild West was not conquered by movie heroes. It was conquered by men who discovered, victim by victim, that human cruelty has no natural ceiling. Punishment number 8, the family vendetta. When revenge passed from father to son, and blood demanded blood for entire generations. On the frontier, a murder was never the end of a story. It was the beginning of a cycle where each death demanded another. Each family accumulated unpayable blood debts, and hatred became an inheritance as concrete as land or cattle. Killing was the easy part of the process. Stopping the killing was the impossible part. The rivalry between the Hatfields and the McCoys is the ultimate symbol of this logic. In August of 1882, after members of the McCoys killed Ellison Hatfield in an election day brawl, the retaliation came swift and without mercy. The Hatfields kidnapped 3 McCoy brothers, tied each one of them to a different tree in the forest, and shot them with more than 50 rounds total. It was not enough to kill. It was necessary to perforate each body until the message was engraved in lead. A legal response from the McCoys did not come, so the Hatfields went to deliver it personally. On New Year's Eve of 1888, an armed group of Hatfields surrounded the cabin where the McCoy family slept. They opened fire on the entire house. 2 sons were killed in their own beds. Randolph McCoy's wife was beaten with a rifle butt and left to die in the snow while the cabin burned. The New Year's Night Massacre entered the federal archives. But the most cinematic vendetta of the Wild West belongs to Wyatt Earp. In March of 1882, after the assassination of his brother Morgan in a Tombstone saloon in Arizona, Earp assembled a small armed posse and set out on a personal hunt that was recorded as the Earp Vendetta Ride. He executed 4 men he considered responsible, without trial, without warrant, without hesitation. The law Earp had sworn to protect was the same one he burned with every shot. The Sutton-Taylor feud in Texas lasted more than a decade. From the 1860s to the 1870s, it started as a personal dispute and gradually transformed into open war between clans. Ambushes on isolated roads, shootouts inside saloons, murders committed inside courtrooms during hearings, dozens of confirmed dead. The conflict involved entire communities forced to choose a side. Neutrality did not exist as an option. Whoever allied with nobody became a target for everyone. In Arizona, the Pleasant Valley War, also known as the Tonto Basin War, put the Graham and Tewksbury families in mortal conflict between 1882 and 1892. It started with a cattle dispute and ended with blood. Nearly all the adult men of both families were killed over the course of the decade. The last, Graham Tom, was murdered on a street in Tempe in August of 1892. 10 years of hunting that only stopped when there was nobody left to continue killing. The pattern repeated itself every time. An initial murder, sometimes accidental, sometimes deliberate. The victim's family retaliated. The other family counterattacked in response. Allies and distant cousins were dragged into the conflict. Entire communities split into 2 trenches. And the cycle continued until one of the families was completely exterminated, or until both were too destroyed to keep fighting. The vendetta knew no draw. It knew only exhaustion. Dozens of feuds followed exactly this model across the American frontier, each with its local particularities, but all driven by the same engine. The conviction that justice was a personal responsibility, not an institutional one. Where the state failed, the rifle took over. Where the law did not reach, blood spoke loudly. The vendetta was not a deviation of the frontier. It was the purest logic of it. And that logic only stopped when there was nobody left to obey it. Punishment number 9, desecration of bodies. When death was not enough and the corpse became property. In the Wild West, killing an enemy was only the first act of the story. The second was transforming his remains into an object, a keepsake, or an explicit demonstration of power. Vigilantes, soldiers, and ordinary citizens treated corpses as raw material available to whoever arrived first. The frontier did not respect the living, the dead, even less. The most disturbing case has a proper name: Big Nose George Parrott. On March 22, 1881, after being lynched by an enraged mob in Rawlins, Wyoming, his body was handed over to Dr. John Osborne for medical study purposes. But the doctor went far beyond science. He separated the top of the skull for personal use as a decorative object. He sent pieces of the dead man's skin to a tannery. The body of a bandit became artisanal craft material. With the leather obtained from Parrott's body, Dr. Osborne had a pair of shoes and a medical office bag made. Accessories made of human skin, used in the daily routine of the clinic like any other personal item of a professional. It was not the secret ritual of a disturbed man. It was a respected doctor, a member of the local elite of small Rawlins, who wore his items with the naturalness of someone breaking in a pair of boots ordered from a catalog. And here the story surpasses any fiction screenplay. In November of 1892, John Osborne was elected governor of Wyoming, taking office the following year. At the official ceremony, he wore the shoes made from the mortal remains of George Parrott. The most powerful man in the entire state wore human vestiges, while swearing to protect the law and citizenship of Wyoming. The shoes and the top of Parrott's skull survived the passage of time. Today they are on display at the Carbon County Museum in Rawlins, Wyoming, the same town where he was lynched in 1881. Visitors pay admission to observe up close the objects that were once part of a human body. The museum treats the pieces as regional historical curiosities, but what is inside that glass case is material proof that the frontier knew no limits, not even after death. Parrott was not an isolated exception. On the frontier, remains of outlaws were routinely repurposed after execution. Personal belongings and even body parts were removed and sold as souvenirs at fairs and bars. Pieces of hanging rope were sold as macabre relics at varying prices. The death industry was not limited to the execution itself. It continued as a parallel trade in macabre curiosities, where any trace had a guaranteed buyer. The desecration of bodies revealed something deeper than individual cruelty. It was a complete system that dehumanized its victims even after their last breath. If in life the frontier already denied fair trial to the poor and foreigners, in death it also denied the right to rest and basic dignity. The body no longer belonged to the person or to their family. It belonged to whoever had the power and willingness to treat it as common merchandise. Punishment number 10. Poisoning and biological warfare. When killing with your own hands was unnecessary and poison did the dirty work in complete silence. On the frontier, strychnine, arsenic, and cyanide were sold at any rural pharmacy without a prescription. The symptoms were easily confused with cholera and other common diseases of the time. Proving poisoning was nearly impossible in practice. The perfect killer fit inside a glass vial. Settlers and tribes contaminated enemy water sources with decomposing animal carcasses. In the arid American Southwest, where a single well made the difference between living and dying on a 2-day walk, poisoning the water was a collective death sentence. Entire communities died within days after drinking, without a laboratory, without an expert, without an autopsy. Death arrived disguised as a common illness and nobody suspected a thing. The most documented case of biological warfare as punishment happened before the American frontier had even fully opened. At Fort Pitt, in June of 1763, during Pontiac's rebellion, British officers distributed blankets and handkerchiefs contaminated with smallpox to emissaries of the Delaware Nation. General Jeffrey Amherst approved the tactic in writing in a letter to Colonel Bouquet, ordering the extirpation of this execrable race. Death was delivered wrapped as a gift. Amherst's written order survived in the British archives. Rare proof that biological extermination was deliberate, not an accident in the midst of war. Letters exchanged between high command officers discussed the logistics of contamination with the same bureaucratic coldness as a supply request. Infected blankets and handkerchiefs were the chosen instruments. Smallpox did what cannons and muskets could not do fast enough. It killed without leaving a bullet mark. In the range wars, between 1870 and 1920, cattle ranchers used poison as an economic weapon against sheep herders who invaded what they called their lands. Strychnine was mixed into feed or spread across pasture fields at night. More than 50,000 sheep were poisoned, dynamited, or pushed off cliffs in at least 120 attacks documented by the press across 8 different states in the American West. The attacks on sheep were not isolated explosions by enraged ranchers. They were organized campaigns with advanced military planning. Armed groups invaded properties at dawn, poisoned entire flocks in silence, and disappeared before daybreak. Shepherds who tried to fight back were threatened, beaten, or simply killed. The collective message was clear to any newcomer. This land belongs to cattle. The sheep must disappear. What made poisoning so effective on the frontier was the total absence of forensic expertise. Arsenic had no smell or taste in seasoned food. Strychnine killed in minutes with symptoms that mimicked natural epileptic convulsions. Cyanide acted too quickly for the victim to call for help out loud. Without qualified doctors, without chemical laboratories, without police investigation, the poisoner was invisible. The frontier offered the perfect setting for anyone who killed without witnesses. Punishment number 11. The systematic destruction of resources. When the target was not the person themselves, but everything that kept them alive. Burning entire villages, killing all the horses, destroying the winter supplies that had been stored. On the American frontier, a single act committed by a single individual was enough to justify the annihilation of an entire community. The punishment did not distinguish warriors from women, children from the elderly. It destroyed everything and called it official justice. At the Marias River Massacre in January of 1870, a single Piegan warrior killed a white rancher. Major Eugene Baker's retaliation did not hit the actual person responsible. It attacked the wrong camp. The peaceful village of Chief Heavy Runner was destroyed at dawn by the American cavalry. Approximately 200 people were killed. The majority, women and children, sick with smallpox, physically unable to flee. Everything burned. Horses confiscated. Nobody corrected the error afterward. At Bear River, on January 29, 1863, Colonel Patrick Edward Connor announced before the attack that he would take no prisoners that day. The Shoshone village of Chief Bear Hunter was attacked in retaliation for thefts committed by young warriors. More than 350 people were killed that morning, 70 tents destroyed, 175 horses taken as spoils. It is the largest massacre of indigenous people in American history. For decades, it was recorded as a battle. At the Washita River, in November of 1868, General George Custer attacked the village of Chief Black Kettle at dawn. The disturbing detail, Black Kettle was the same chief who had survived the Sand Creek Massacre 4 years earlier. Custer burned all the tents, all the food, all the clothing, all the winter supplies that had been stockpiled, and then he ordered the slaughter of more than 800 horses. Without horses, without food, without shelter. In the middle of the Oklahoma winter, at Palo Duro Canyon in September of 1874, Colonel Ranald Mackenzie captured the herd of the Quahati Comanches, 1,400 horses, and he ordered all of them slaughtered on the same day. For the Comanches, the horse was not merely a means of transportation. It was wealth, military mobility, cultural identity, and practical survival, all in a single animal. Destroying the horses was destroying the nation itself. The surrender of the Quixote came weeks later. Without horses, there was no way to fight or flee. The practice was not limited to conflicts with indigenous peoples. In August of 1863, after William Quantrill and his guerrillas burned the town of Lawrence, Kansas, killing more than 150 civilian men, General Thomas Ewing issued General Order No. 11. 4 entire counties of Missouri were forcibly emptied in 2 weeks, houses burned, farms destroyed, families expelled with only what they could carry in their hands. One of the largest forced displacements in American history. The logic of destruction was simple and relentless. If you cannot find the enemy, destroy everything that sustains his life. Without stockpiled food, without shelter in winter, without horses to flee, without tools to plant, any human group surrenders or dies within a few weeks. There was no need to aim at the people. It was enough to aim at what kept them alive. The frontier discovered that hunger killed more efficiently than any rifle, and without wasting a single bullet, the systematic destruction of resources left marks that lasted generations. Entire nations lost not only lives, but the ability to exist as a people. Horses, food, shelter, tools, sacred territories, all erased. What the rifle could not accomplish in decades of war, hunger, and winter accomplished in a few weeks. Write in the comments which punishment disturbed you the most. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Until next time.